What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the PFF NFL Show, a In the Trenches edition of the PFF NFL Show. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly here with you guys to talk about all things trenches in the NFL. We got Week 6 fully in the books here after Monday Night Football, and here on this show, we've talked about and highlighted a lot of individual things. Sometimes it's individual offensive or defensive lineman performances. Sometimes just units overall, giving them shout-outs. What's most impressive, what's most disappointing. So we figured for today, we can kind of round out all of that in a really good way and talk about the top 10 defensive lines in the NFL so far 6 weeks through the 2024 NFL season. Ollie, how you doing today, my friend? This is a massive undertaking, as we said before we started the show. There's a lot of pressure, no fun involved. You got to get it exactly right, but I'm excited to talk about this with you, man.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I want to know where your head's at with these teams as well. And as you said, I take these things so seriously. I end up putting way too much pressure on myself. And there are so many good defensive lines in the league this year that it's hard to kind of get the breakdown between the top 4, top 5, and then there is about 10, 12 teams you could end up squeezing in, I think, to the back end of the list.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a really fun conversation here for this one. And then for next week, just so everybody knows, we'll flip over to the other side and we'll talk about the top 10 offensive lines in the NFL as we have seen them so far up to that season. At that point, it will be after Week 7, so we get a little bit of an extra week to evaluate them. And selfishly, I hope some of them manifest a little bit more even over the next week so I can give some recency bias, because getting 10 for offensive line might be a little bit more difficult than getting 10 for this one. There were a lot of different defensive lines to choose from, and that means a lot of kudos that we get to give out today, so I'm looking forward to it. Hey, everybody out there, if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, please go to PFF.com, get yourself one. You're going to hear us talk about all sorts of different statistics here on this show, pass rush win percentage stuff, pressure numbers, pressure percentage, all that good stuff. And we'll talk about it individually and as a team. If you want to see all these numbers for yourself, the best way to do that is going to PFF.com, getting yourself that PFF Plus subscription. And it's not just the premium stats, it's so much more. If you're into fantasy football, the NFL draft, free agency insight, all that good stuff you can get with that PFF Plus subscription. It is a year-round thing that you will absolutely love to use. Ollie, I figured the best way to do this is we've got to build up suspense, right? We got to leave number 1 for the end so people can actually tune into the whole show so we can keep the lights on, paying the bills with the ads that we got to read. So let's start at number 10 here. I want to hear from you, and I think that we should probably, you want to break it up a little bit, or do you want to just go 1 for 1, or should we go like 10 to 8 and then kind of discuss a little bit and then kind of go to another little group? How do you want to do this here? I'm letting you do dealer's choice. I don't really care either way.
Yeah, I want to go 1-1 because I'm so concerned about the back end. My initial plan was just kind of on the fly, bail on numbers 7 through 10 and just decide in the moment how I was feeling in my gut, because I like these groups so much. So If we can go 1-1, I can maybe buy myself an extra beat working through these teams. You want me to start with my number 10?
Let's do it. Let's hear who you got at number 10 here for defensive line 6 weeks into the season.
At number 10, I have the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay,
and this is a really, really tricky one because it is so difficult to figure out, as we've discussed through all these teams, all the players we've gone through in the opening weeks. How do you separate the scheme stuff from just the play of the players? And they are the one that I think is the most difficult, right, to delineate between how much is scheme help, how much is just individual excellence. But I don't think you can overlook, given the output of the group as a whole, and they've had a bunch of help from the secondary, from the linebacker play, but that defensive line is still played at a really high level. I think Jonathan Greenard, Andrew Van Ginkel have been the two standout guys, but they've had a bunch of success all across the board. So I think it's hard to overlook a team that's playing as well as any group in the NFL. I just don't think I could leave them off the list.
Yeah, 16 sacks this season as a group, just defensive linemen and edge rushers. I mean, that's top 5 in the NFL. And then when you look at total pressures as well, they're a little bit lower, but they're still top 15. They're 12th right there. The pass rush win percentage is a little bit lower. Like you mentioned, it's sort of a defensive line that's all about what they are collectively, which again, we're talking about total defensive lines here for this show. So it's not like that's really a negative. They're all coming together and playing very well. I did not have them in my top 10. They would have just missed here for me, but I can understand why you love what Minnesota is able to do, certainly because they are players who, it's a complex scheme, it's an aggressive scheme, but they're playing it very, very well. And sometimes it's not about that just individual, hey, you got to win your one-on-one. Sometimes it really is that you've got to do sort of the dirty work to set somebody up to be able to get in the backfield. And that is also, something that is valuable. So I didn't have the Minnesota Vikings in there, which means I'm going to have somebody on my list that you didn't have in yours. But I'll start at number 10 with mine. And that's the Denver Broncos. I think the Broncos are playing really well this season. And it's a little bit like what you talked about with the Minnesota Vikings, where it's sort of a collective with this group. I just think that even if you look at them as a bigger collective, I know Zach Allen's having a really good year, and I want to definitely shout him out for how well he's playing. I like Jonathan Cooper as well. They've got John Franklin Myers that they brought over. Like, there are guys like that are really being able to stand out. But when I look at them, they're second in the NFL right now in total pressures with 119. Their pass rush win percentage is a little bit higher. As a group, they are 12th. And then, when you look at just sacks, they're second in the NFL. So statistically, they're a little bit better than the Vikings. But it is funny that you kind of started with the Vikings, a team that is more on the whole than it is necessarily about the individuals. And then I started with the Denver Broncos, a team that is kind of there as well. So I got the Broncos as my number 10 team, but I'm curious. You don't have to give it away if they're not like number 9 or anything, but do you have the Broncos? Because if you don't, I'd love to hear what you thought about them this season.
Yeah, I have the Broncos. I have them just slightly higher on the list for the same thing you said. I mean, we did a deep dive on them a couple of weeks back, and I'm just so in awe of how well tied together the unit is. As you said, working as a collective, how do they work as a team? And the major thing with them is they just don't miss opportunities. They don't have the individual talent, I don't think, beyond Zach Allen, who I think is having an excellent season. Cooper's having a good season, though I think his numbers are slightly inflated by some scheme stuff as compared to Allen. They don't have the individual talent to just go win one-on-one all across the front, right, and just hammer opposing offensive lines, but they don't miss opportunities. I think they're 6th in the NFL this season so far in pressure to sack conversion rate, just as a defensive line, not creating unblocked pressures for safeties, linebackers, anyone else, just those guys. So when they get opportunities, when someone helps bring someone, when they do win their reps, they get home and they close. And that is a distinction between the Vikings group and the Broncos group. And they've also been really, really impressive stopping the run, particularly on early downs. It's not been brilliant overall, but when you just isolate to the line, which is what we're doing here, those guys have played really well up front.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So obviously we'll talk a little bit about the Broncos a little bit more when you get to them in your rankings, but let's move on. Who you got at number 9?
This one was painful. This one comes down to how do you, Trev, and we'll find out, I guess, as we work through the rankings together, how do you pull apart and separate one or two players having dominant seasons and you feel like these are 5 or 6 of the best players in the sport right now, with you watch the rest of the guys and go, am I sure they should be playing on Sundays? How come they keep rotating these guys at 20 snaps each because the staff isn't sure either who should be playing? So this was a really difficult one for me. I went with the Houston Texans.
I also have them at number 9.
Consensus makes me feel good. I feel good now. Do you want to explain why you had them at 9 then?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take over and then I'll bounce it back to you for it. But it's kind of the way that you set it up here. It is a defensive line that overall not great. When you look at the total defensive line, their run defense grade, for example, is a 44.2. I mean, that's one of the lower marks of defensive lines that we have this season. And a lot of it kind of comes down to those guys in the middle who aren't exactly playing well. And even beyond like lower pass rush numbers. I mean, Foley Fudukasi, Tim Settle, like these guys have run defense grades on the interior below 35. So they're really, I think, bringing down the group overall. But when you get to the good, Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter, both of these guys are top 10 edge rushers right now in the NFL. And it's really hard to leave a group that has 2 top 10 edge rushers off of this list. I can't do it. Both of them are grading above in the 80s. I believe Will Anderson Jr.'s got an 82.5 overall grade. I believe that Danielle Hunter is somewhere right around like 80 itself. So these are 2 guys who are playing very, very well. They're high pressure players. And sort of like you were talking about with the Minnesota Vikings being finishers, right? These guys who have the ability to get into the backfield, and when they do, they're productive. They can end plays. That's what these 2 guys do, and they mean the world, I think, to this defense and this defensive line overall. So it's a tricky one because of exactly how you set it up, where how much weight do you give the good and the bad of something where you really have to take in both equations, because we are talking about ranking defensive lines. In my opinion, even with the interior defensive line not really pulling its weight so far this season, the other two guys have been so good. I could not leave them out of the top 10 with two top 10 edge rushers there in Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter. They've just been fantastic on this D-line. So that's why I got him at number 9. Why do you have him at number 9?
Yeah, the same way. And I think they get bonus marks. So those are the pieces they invested in. That's where they put the money. They were trying to like figure out and body and scheme their way through the interior. So there's going to be struggles. Hopefully, whether it's Khalil Davis, someone with some kind of internal development, they can settle on something over the course of the season. They paid money to Hunter. They drafted Will Anderson with the hope of when we get to the postseason, when we get to the playoffs, we can tee off and go. We'll generate negative plays and we can finish games. And that is what they're showing. And Anderson's numbers got boosted slightly by facing the Pats offensive line this weekend, and that was maybe their best performance, though it still wasn't all that impressive, but he has still been excellent throughout the whole season. And to me, what stands out with Will Anderson is not just the pass rushing stuff, which has always just been off the charts with him, still just as a run defender. He is one of, I think, the most underrated guys in the league as a run defender. Hunter's always been a really talented run defender too. So they kind of have it both ways with these two guys. The only concern as we project forward with them slightly is it's the one group I look on our list and I go, they are an injury away from being in really, really serious trouble. And we've seen obviously injuries take out some really good groups this week, but they're healthy at the moment. They're going to get Denico Autry back from his suspension, and maybe we could see them rise up the list if they can figure out some stuff along the interior.
I think the Denico Autry point is a great one as well, where, you know, we look at those two edge rushers, and I completely agree with you. Any injury to either of those two guys, and I think the Texans probably plummet on this list. They're well outside of the top 10, even with just one of them there. But Denico Autry helps, right? Denico Autry at least creates that rotation. It keeps these guys even more fresh. So if it was just those two before, throwing Autry into the mix, who's got experience with D'Amico Ryans, I think is going to be really good for this team. And so I think that's a really good shout out there from you as well. Number 8. Who do you got as number 8 on the list?
I had the Broncos at 8. That's where I had them. And my concern with them would be they were maximizing so much early in the season. Can this sustain throughout the year? I think Zach Allen's for real. I think the breakout is for real. I think the improvement as a pass rusher is for real. Can he maintain a kind of superstar pressure rate? I'm not so sure, but I think the run defense stuff on early downs is for real. And then it's just a question of what more can we tap into from more of the rotational pieces? We mentioned Jonathan Cooper flashing. He wins in so many different ways that I would not have expected early in his career. So that, to me, is a real true breakout and you would hope could sustain. It's just, can they find something from the edges from anywhere else? Obviously, we saw Pat Surtain go down at the weekend. They're already a high blitz team, so they're already doing extra things, right, to be able to try and generate more rush from elsewhere. But to be a team that can have the line take over games, I think they just have to find, whether it's Benito, who's been so high variant, so up and down, some great weeks, some really poor weeks. Can they find someone who just gives them a bit more sustainability on the edges?
Yeah, I do agree with you. And Allen is the guy who I think makes everything go, but you know, what's necessarily the ceiling with the rest of the guys around him building around Zach Allen this season? Obviously, we're talking about them as a top 10 defensive line, so it's a big shout out to how well they are playing overall, because I don't think a lot of people looked at the Broncos defensive line specifically. I think people probably looked at Pat Surtain in the secondary. You know, they talk about their offensive line a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation with Bo Nix and kind of what this team's going to be on offense, but in the trenches, specifically the defensive line, I think that they have performed very, very well. I'm curious as to whether or not this team made your top 10 or not. It's the New York Giants. I've got the New York Giants at number 8 here for me. And, you know, it's interesting. We've talked about them individually here on this show. We've highlighted Dexter Lawrence in particular. You know, his first 3 weeks of the season, elite 90.5 pass rushing grade through weeks 1 through 3, over 20% pass rush win percentage. He's gone a little bit quiet from an individual perspective over the last 3 weeks, so weeks 4 through 6. His pass rush win percentage is now below 10%. His pass rush grade is in the 60s. So it is lower than certainly what it was to start the year. But I've got faith that Dexter Lawrence is going to come back and obviously be fantastic. I think it's just kind of a quiet 3 weeks for him. On the flip side, I was a little concerned with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns and Azeez Ojulari and those guys in the first couple of weeks in the season. While Lawrence was playing well, it felt like the other guys weren't really able to rally around him, and they weren't able to come in as a complete defensive line. Now, with Lawrence taking a little bit of a backseat over the last couple of weeks, I think those guys have played very, very well. Thibodeau misses last week. Oshulari is able to step up. He has a pretty good performance. Brian Burns had one of the best run defense grades that he has ever had in his career this past Sunday. We've seen him be a good pass rusher as well. So Brian Burns now playing very well. Kayvon Thibodeau's pass rush win percentage is now above that 10% mark. So we're into double digits. We're getting better with him. And now with Azeez Ojulari playing the way that he has this past week against the Bengals, I've got faith that, okay, now you get a decent edge rush rotation in there. Raheem Nunez-Roches played well as well. And then, again, I have full faith that Dexter Lawrence is going to figure it out as one of the best defenders in the NFL. He's going to get back to playing at a primetime level at some point. And then when you throw that in with how well the other guys are now playing, to me, it's a Giants defensive line where if you look at some of the statistics, the pass rush win percentage overall as a group has been lower for the whole season because it's a little bit up and down. But it's also me projecting a little bit and saying, hey, this group's coming along. I can't really leave them out of their top 10. To start the season, the first couple of weeks, it felt like it was just the big names who weren't really producing the way that we wanted them to. But now they are. And when Lawrence kind of is able to flip the switch once again, like we know he's going to, this is going to be a really good unit. So I have them at number 8. Did you have them in the top 10? I'm very curious.
Yeah, so I had them at number 7. So we'll bounce back to your number 7 after this. For the same reasons you mentioned, I felt Dex Lawrence was pretty dominant against the Seahawks. They just all took over that game. That is what we tried to acquire when we brought all you guys to the building. We gave you all meaty contracts, right? It was we can just go through a game where when we face an opponent where we should have 3 wins off the snap consistently, you guys should just dominate. And Lawrence is drawing so much attention, which is part of the plan, right? We're going to get these 2 edge benders around the sides. We're going to get Thibodeau. We're going to get Burns. Both of them can go inside, outside. Thibodeau in that game was driving Charles Cross off the ball, something I never thought I'd see in the NFL. Kayvon Thibodeau power rushing people, which speaks more to Cross, I think, than it does to Thibodeau. In fact, he hurt his wrist. I do wonder if it's like the first time in a long time he's tried to power rush through someone. He ended up hurting his wrist. So they're getting the group, I think, to function the way it was acquired to do, right? We get the speed off the snap with Lawrence. Everyone panics, and they have to just mush bodies in there. And we get 2 one-on-ones on the outside with 2 guys who should be at the NFL level, dominant one-on-one rushers. Burns, we know what he is. He's going to be a speed around the edge guy. And even if he doesn't win every rep, you know it's going to be the same path, the same looks, and that's what he's going to give you, and he'll win 4 or 5 clean a game. And you can build a really nice pressure plan and pressure group off the fact you've got that bend every single time, right? And it's going to be in the quarterback's mind. And so it frees up Thibodeau to, I think, fall to 3 in the rotation to try different things. And I think we're starting to see him play the best football of his pro career.
Yeah, when I was looking at that Seahawks game, we've talked about before about the struggles with the Seattle Seahawks and their offensive line. Stone Forsythe, the starting at offensive tackle, but he's the 3rd offensive tackle option with Abe Lucas and George Fant down. And so, when I saw some really good numbers from Kayvon Thibodeau, I was just like, oh, okay, was Kayvon going up against Stone Forsythe? Not that I wanted to necessarily take anything away from him, but Thibodeau hasn't really been a big one-on-one winner. So when I saw that the pass rush win percentage was high and the one-on-one wins were high, I wondered if he was just going up against Forsythe. But he was going up against Charles Cross quite a bit, and he was using those power moves. And again, it's those little things that give me faith on the Giants. They could make their way into the top 5 of this list when we review it, a couple of weeks from now, whenever we look at this thing again. So, all right, I'm going to get to number 7. But before I do, it's a month of tricks, the month of October, treats, of course, as well, and touchdowns. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is the number 1 place to bet on touchdowns this spooky season. On the ground, in the air, special teams, defense, don't care how they score them. We just want to bet on touchdowns, right? DraftKings, it's the number 1 place to bet on touchdowns. If you're ready to place your first bet, try betting on something simple, like a player to score a touchdown. There could be a little bit of a change, a player in and out of a lineup. You're paying attention to these things all week long. And if you see something, even just right before kickoff, you go, man, I like this matchup. I've been hearing good things about this player over the last couple of weeks or at practice or whatever it is. Throw some money on the line, just scoring a touchdown. It's it. It's easy. New DraftKings customers, they bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. With DraftKings Sportsbook, the number 1 place to bet on touchdowns this season. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the promo code PFF, promo code PFF. For new customers, get $200 $100 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. If you got a gambling problem, just call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, it's 877-8-HOPE-NY, or you can just text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problems with gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gambling resources, visit dkng.co/FTBALL. All right, this is another one. Not to kind of like intro it and say it the same, but I'm curious where you are with this team. Philadelphia Eagles are number 7 for me, and it's more
What's happening? Oh, can I just say we did not do a pre-show meeting where we said let's share our list beforehand. I also have the Eagles in 6, but I will allow you to continue with your reasoning.
Okay, all right, so there we go. Wait, have we hit the team that I had that you didn't yet? I had the Broncos, we had the Texans, because you had the Vikings and you had the Broncos in there. We both had the Giants, now we both have the Eagles. So I have somebody. Oh, I think I know who it is. Who it is. That's on the list that you know. All right, anyways, we're getting ahead of our skis here, but hopefully they'll get people to keep listening to the show. 7, I got the Philadelphia Eagles, and it really is just I think it's people are going to talk about, what do they have outside of the interior play, right? What do they have outside of Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, who had 2 fantastic weeks this past week against the Cleveland Browns, by the way. Their highest graded defensive linemen are actually Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat. I mean, it's the 2 veterans of the group. So, even with a group that I think people talk about the Eagles because it's not as dominant along the defensive line as it has been in years past. It's not these highlight names, but even Nolan Smith plays well this past weekend. Yeah, it hasn't come along with Bryce Huff. Like, obviously, that's something that they're still waiting to really cash in on, being able to bring him in and make that difference for Hassan Reddick leaving. But the defensive line, even right now, without Bryce Huff, is good. It's a really good unit. It's a deep unit. They're playing well. Like I said, Nolan Smith's playing a little bit better. You have the 2 interior guys, and then you got the guys on the edge that you can lean on that have that veteran experience. So, for the Philadelphia Eagles, over the last 3 weeks specifically, 70.9 run defense grade is a defensive line, 74.9 is a pass rush grade, and then just a 76.9 defensive grade overall, which is really strong. The top 4. That's a 77.7 defensive grade. I actually ran the wrong line for a different team. They're 6th in run defense. They're 7th in pass rush. They had a 47.1 run defense grade through the first 3 weeks of the season, but these last 3 weeks have really come together as a deep group, and they've been playing well. The top 7 snap count defensive linemen on the team all have overall defensive grades above 65 over the last 3 games. So they are coming into their own as a defensive line, and even though they don't have as much individual flair as they have had over the last couple of years, as a group, I still think the Eagles are playing at a top 8 level, clearly with me having them at number 7. But that transitions well because you said you got them at number 6.
Yeah, and to me, we've talked about this when we did a breakdown of them playing the Saints. They kind of changed their structure pretty radically. Like they tried to do similar things they'd done the season before. Oddly, they bring in Vic Fangio to run the Fangio defense, thinking they'd run it before, right? So it's an easy progression. Just go get the real guy rather than a pretender. They bring Fangio, and he's not running his own defense to open the season, then decides midstream, like, it would be really sensible to just run the thing they hired me to do. They switch the front structures. You mentioned they get really heavy. They put a bunch more of interior guys on there. They try and clean things up for a lot of those edge guys on early downs, and they just start mauling people on early downs. I think my one concern with them is, one, they've become really package dependent, where they have to roll through different guys to get to certain different things. And I think it's tipping a lot of what they want to do defensively, and they might end up getting smoked by a really good staff on the offensive side of the ball. So I think that's one concern. When you're packaged by, we need to put Moro Ojomo on for certain style of plays and pressures we want to run as an interior rusher because we have to take Jordan Davis off the field, you're really selling to the other side of the ball, right? Exactly what you're trying to get to. So that's a slight concern for me with them overall. The other thing would just be, they run so hot and cold, not individually necessarily, but as a group, that they do really beat up on bad groups and have not, to me, overwhelmed a really good group. And you can see it in some of the pressure figures, more so in quick pressure, which to me is always a testament to the just raw talent of the line, right? That you start to strip away some of the coverage stuff. You kind of mix in some blitz things there, but for the most part, particularly if you isolate to first and second down, non-obvious splits and pressure downs, you can really get a feel for it. People just winning off the line, right? They're winning one-on-one matchups. Someone's splitting a 2-on-1, and they're midway to lower down in those rates early in the season. And when you put them against the good groups, they fall all the way to 24th in the NFL in quick pressure rate. So that to me is like the lingering concern. I'm hoping that it's just come alive and come active as they've changed some of the structure, as guys have started to play better. And I think they will improve over the season and could live up to that potential, particularly building around Carter with Graham cycling through, who's played really well. So I have hope that they can actually rise up the list, but there's that underlying little bit of trepidation that maybe they're just feasting a little bit on worse groups, and there's some bad habits lingering under the surface in the figures beyond the kind of some of the top line marks.
I think that's a good shout out as well. Okay, for number 6, this is one of 2 potential teams that I think I have on my list that you don't. And obviously the higher we get onto mine and we don't know yet, that is very intriguing to me. So 6, I have the Los Angeles Rams. Do you have them in your top 10?
I do not, and that was a really painful one to leave off.
Okay, so I have the Rams at number 6, and I think so. This is where we're a little bit different. You said that these guys barely missed. At the top of the show, we talked about how there's a lot of really good defensive lines in the NFL right now, and it's kind of tough to narrow it down to 10. So you had them just out of your top 10. I have them at number 6, and the reason why is because, Ollie, over the last 4 weeks, this team's playing really good football in the trenches. Are they a super deep group? No, but they're top 4 snap players along the defensive line. It's Byron Young, it's Kobe Turner, and then it's rookies, it's Braden Fisk, and it's Jared Verse. Every single one of them, all 4, have PFF overall grade, pass rushing grades above 70. Like, these guys are able to get after the passer, and they're playing really well over the last, I think, 3 weeks in particular. Both Braden Fisk and Jared Verse have pass rush grades above 80. So they are really getting after the quarterback well. We've talked about Jared Verse and highlighted him here on this show. We also have highlighted it in the rookie review show that you guys watch with myself and John Ledyard, how well Jared Verse is creating pressures and how well he is getting after the quarterback. Braden Fisk is starting to come along as well. A little bit of a slow start for him to start the season, but the last 4 weeks, I should say, he has really started to come on, him playing next to Kobe Turner. Byron Young's getting it together with that explosiveness and that athleticism at the other edge spot opposite Jared Verse. So to me, it's not a super deep group, but it was hard for me to put them any lower than this because they have been playing so well as a 4, like as a group. And so that front 4 that you talk about that, like I mentioned, are playing the most snaps on the team, they're very valuable. They're really getting after the quarterback. They're collapsing the pocket. And to me, they're just playing really, really well as a group. If you lose one of those guys, I don't really know if it continues to work at that level. It would probably still continue to work with Jared Verse, who individually is playing super, super well. When you look at his passers win percentage over the last 4 weeks, it's right around 19.6%. But that 4-week mark as well, Byron Young's at 20%. Kobe Turner's at 15%. Braden Fisk is at 18.3 passer win percentage. I mean, these are really, really good scores from this top 4 for the Los Angeles Rams. So I like them a lot. They're putting these young guys in really good positions to win one-on-one. And even though they're younger, even though they're kind of overlooked going into the season, they're playing really well. And I got them at number 6 here, 6 weeks into the season.
Yeah, and this is why I started the podcast with a pain in my stomach, being like, oh, I just hate doing this stuff. It's going to end up being that he was right, and I should have had them maybe 4th overall because that was an unbelievable explanation how well they play. What I think really stands out with them, which has slightly gone under the radar, is they built a group. There was this whole conversation, right, almost memified of recreating Aaron Donald in the aggregate. And what they decided to do by taking Fisk and by taking Verse was they openly said, we will just become a stunt-heavy base defense. That's where we want to move to moving forward, is we're just going to run a ton of stunts. We'll get the quick twitch guy inside. We get the power rush from the perimeter. You don't know if we're stunting or not stunting, but we're going to have one of the highest rates in the NFL trying to do games inside. And they opened the season trying to do that, and it was somewhat effective, but not blow your way effective. The young guys were learning what they were doing. Young, on the other side, does not really profile as a true stunt guy, so he would hold his side, right, and they'd stunt away from him. As the season's gone along, they've just stripped a lot of that out of what they do. They've realized these guys are really, really good one-on-one. You just read off some of the figures for the last few weeks. That is top-tier type stuff. And to have that split across all those guys, right, is unbelievably impressive. So they've recognized really quickly in the season, these guys are better than we maybe thought they could be earlier in their career. So we can actually turn things down a little bit, be even less scheme-based. So these are not blown-up figures by scheme and design, as we talked about with some other groups. This is just young guys winning one-on-one a bunch. Their stunt rate has fallen to be 19th, 20th in the NFL over the past 3-4 weeks. So that is a pretty dramatic shift for a staff to make early when they came in wanting a certain identity, drafted to a certain identity, and those guys profile as guys who can deliver that identity. And it's almost like we struck such gold with how talented these guys are right off the bat. We don't even need to get into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's, being able to adjust for a young group like this is very important. And for you to say, like, okay, we went into the season thinking we'll probably have to help these guys out a little bit, probably not going to win as much one-on-one. Now they're winning one-on-one. So it's like when you have a secondary that is so talented that they can play a lot of man coverage, but also so great working together that they can play a lot of zone. The versatility that gives you on the back end, people don't often talk about that in a similar light when they talk about the trenches, but I do think it's a really good way to highlight it. Like you said, they are versatile now as a group along that defensive line. So Rams, number 6 for me. Now we're getting into the top 5. There's one team in particular that is very, very intriguing of where you put them here in the top 5, given what unfortunately happened this past weekend. So who is number 5 for you? I'm curious if it's that team or if we're going to keep rolling here.
I have the Cleveland Browns at 5.
Oh, I don't have the Browns in my top 10. Whoa. Okay, here's another team. I didn't think we were getting here. Okay, Cleveland. Tell me about Cleveland. Let's go.
This is the one where I was like, do I really want to have a list that doesn't have Myles Garrett?
That's fair. That's extremely fair.
When the guy is playing with two, I don't know what's going on with the feet, but you need surgery on both feet, and he's still the best player in football. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. And look, they've had quiet weeks, and it's really telling with what they've tried to do this season. That they've become more of a blitz-based team, right? They pressure with 5 all the time now. It is a big way of them saying, like, we don't know if we've got the crew anymore to do what we did last season. It's so unsustainable to be a 4-man rush crew every single season, and it is a concern, and they have not been at the same level. But I do think a lot of the kind of defensive frailties have fallen more on the secondary and some of the linebacker play, as good as those guys have actually been, but some of the linebacker play in coverage, more so than it's just been the defensive line on its own. The interior is certainly a concern. They do get Michael Hall back against the Eagles, who showed why he can be a good interior rusher for you on passing downs. So I think they will have a chance here to stabilize, kind of get similar production to they did last year, maybe in a slightly different way, and 5 won't look quite so bonkers in a few weeks. But I just couldn't not have Garrett in the place that I think his play deserves. And they also do, I mentioned the quick pressures before. They led the league in quick pressures last year. They lead the league in quick pressures so far this year. So much of that is just Myles Garrett is better than everyone on the field, but they do have Myles Garrett. So I can't just not knock them down for having the guy who has played as well as anyone in the league this year.
Yeah, I think it might be interesting in a couple of minutes when I reveal who my number 5 team is. It is a very similar conversation, but I wonder if they're not on your list for sort of similar reasons, and the Cleveland Browns are up there because it is hard to keep Myles Garrett off of this list. And I think in years past, we've just automatically had Cleveland as a top 5 defensive line. Garrett is playing well, but even to Garrett's standards, he's not playing as well as he has in the past. You sort of mentioned a couple of reasons why. Zadarius Smith has a high pass rush win percentage, but a lower pass rush grade overall. The interior defensive line for this team is not playing very well. I mean, it's grades in the 50s basically across the board when you look at run defense. And so with pass rush, it's basically just Zadarius Smith and just Myles Garrett. Everyone else has a below 10% pass rush win percentage. So it is a little bit of a feast or famine here. It's sort of going back to the Houston Texans argument, but I think that both of those edge rushers are playing more well-rounded necessarily than Cleveland's edge rushers are. So it basically comes down to having Cleveland in a top 10 or not in a top 10 basically is just what you brought up. How much do you value having Myles Garrett on a defensive line? And perhaps I'm sleeping a little bit on just how good this guy is overall, but I have the San Francisco 49ers at number 5 overall. Do you have the 49ers in your top 5, or were they not in it?
They're not in the list.
Okay, so I figured that the 49ers, when you said the Cleveland Browns, I was like, oh, yeah. Okay, so we flipped. I had the 49ers in here because of the Nick Bosa. Okay, can you really keep Nick Bosa out of this list? And then you had the Cleveland Browns because it's like, okay, can I keep Myles Garrett off of this list? The 49ers have struggled in run defense, and we've talked about that before here on this show. But the run defense grades, even with this team, are, if you compare it to like a team like Cleveland that you have there, where the conversations are very similar, it's sort of one guy carrying the group, and then what are the rest of the players? You have a handful of more players for the 49ers who have those pass rush win rates individually above 10% into double digits. And then the run defense grades, I think, are even a little bit higher individually for the San Francisco 49ers, although they are struggling in run defense as a team. We talked about that being a big reason why they lost to the Arizona Cardinals a couple of weeks ago. The Cardinals were just able to run the ball in the fourth quarter with James Conner at will. And that's a defensive line thing. There's no doubt about it. But I think as a group, they are still collectively okay. And then when you throw in the Nick Bosa thing, basically it's the same argument that you gave with the Cleveland Browns. I just flipped it a little bit because I look at some overall grades that are a little bit higher for the 49ers and some pass rush grades that are a little bit higher with the 49ers than compared to a situation like we have in Cleveland. But I'm assuming the run defense grades and the lack of help around Nick Bosa is kind of why you did not have them here in the top 10.
Yeah, and I flip back and forth exactly as you said, as I'm jotting my list down and being like, well, I don't want to leave Bosa off and I don't want to leave Garrett off, so I'm probably going to pick one, and then where do I plant them in this entire list? And I went with the Browns because I think there's more potential over the next 2-3 weeks. As well as Nick Bosa's played, and he has been completely dominant, I have more faith that Zadarius Smith, who played really well the last 2 weeks, I felt, particularly this last week, can stabilize and get back to a better level than he's played early in the season. I think he'll come back to being at least a viable league average caliber edge defender. I just don't see that kind of progression for the Niners over the course of the season. I like that they get Michael Hall back on the interior of the line. They've kind of settled now. They want Isaiah McGuire to be more of the rotational rusher than the guys whose name, unfortunately, I can't pronounce. You might be able to help me out with that one. I like that there's three pieces there. I think over the next 2-3 weeks, if we revisit the exercise, will I think return back to the norm for the Browns, and I don't expect to drop off from Garrett, whereas I just don't see that with the Niners.
Oh, were you saying Ogbo Nkoronkwo? Was that the name that was incredibly
Absolutely
difficult to say?
Crushed it and made me very embarrassed.
It's a draft thing. It's a draft thing. I have to I have to watch these guys and I have to be able to pronounce the names on the draft show. So it's an intimidating name. There's no doubt about it. But no, I think that's a good point. But yeah, and Zadarius coming along, I think would be really important for this team, because if we didn't have to look at the Cleveland Browns as just a Myles Garrett and who else it's going to be, I think the conversation sort of turns a little bit. When you look at the 49ers, it's no Javon Hargrave, but Kevin Givens did play really well that 1 week. You've got Leonard Floyd in there as well. Malik Collins has at least an above 10% pass rush win percentage individually. So there are those handful of players who I just think that the group around them is stronger with the 49ers, even with all the run defense woes that they have. Let's get into...
I'll just say, lastly, quickly on the Niners, that Sammy O, another name that I have really tried and struggled with, so I've just gone with Sammy O, who was a guy they had in a practice squad hiding out, who I thought he was so impressive in preseason, but then when he was not picked up by anyone else off that practice squad, I was like, oh, they must know something I don't know, or people just evaluate the film differently. He might be a legitimate difference maker. They play him inside a bunch. He can play outside. So that is the one where if I was looking for some kind of flash from out of nowhere for either of the groups, him being a true NFL third down player is not something I had on the bingo card as impressive as I thought he was in preseason. So they do still have some upside. I also think they may make a move in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. 14.8 pass rush win percentage for him. He's got 9 pressures on the season. Pretty solid run defense grades as well. But you're right, the snap count is a little bit lower. He's that rotational player, but I do think that is an X factor for them as well when we talk about the depth of the 49ers defensive line. All right, which defensive line do you have at number 4 now on this list?
I have the Chicago Bears.
Okay. I don't have the Bears on my list. So this is getting way more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Let's go. Okay, so talk to me about the Chicago Bears.
I think they are so wildly underrated for what they've done this season for a multitude of reasons, but I think it's chiefly because people just look at the secondary, which has been so impressive. People, I think, default to Matt Eberflus being the style of defensive coach he has, when Eberflus has actually pretty massively changed the structure of what he's doing on defense this year. It is not as simple as drop and rally to the ball and the line gets some help with the coverage stuff. And the secondary, as I said, has been excellent, but they are a true just like 4 down and go. There's no bells and whistles. They don't put any sprinkles on the cake. It is just you guys have to go win. And I think they've been really effective doing it. They're fourth in the league in sacks. They don't get any unblocked pressures. These are all you have to work for them. You have to win sacks. And they've done this without Montez Sweat playing the kind of football he did last year or the years prior before they acquired him. He's had a pretty slow start to the season, and it's been DeMarcus Walker. It's been Jervon Dexter. And if you just go across the board with them all, they are all racking up solid pass rush win rates. They're all generating pressures on their own. They're all really, really effective shutting down the run. It's not a group, I think, that has this star name. I think maybe Sweat could have become that, right? If Caleb started the season on fire and everyone's talking about the Bears and Sweat was playing really well, he may have entered into more of the star category. But they are just so solid across the board. And I think we have this tendency to default to, well, it must be the coverage, it must be the secondary, because there's a bunch of really good plays back there. But when I watch them against the Jags and they're playing with a bunch of guys cycled in because of injuries in the secondary, then a lot of that was just the line taking over.
You know, the Bears were one of those teams that were right outside of where my top 10 was. Like I talked about, I thought about having them all the way as high as number 7. You mentioned how sort of tough this list was. When you got to number 7 or 8, there were probably 5 or 6 teams that you probably not only could have put in your top 10, but could have even put as high as 7 or 8. So the Bears were in this conversation for me, but you know, when you look at them, I'm glad that you're giving them their kudos at least, because there are 5 players on this team here through the first 3 weeks of the season, 6 weeks of the season, that have double-digit pressures, and all of them other than Darrell Taylor has a pass rush win percentage above 10, so double digits. The pressure percentage is the same way. You got a lot of guys, like you said, winning individually. I didn't have them in my list. I didn't bring them in here because for as good as they are in pass rushing, run defense has been an area where maybe this is sort of my own thought, and maybe I'm holding it a little bit too hard against them. I thought they would just be better as a group overall in run defense, and they have not been as good in run defense this year as I expected them to be. And so with that taking a step back and being a little bit more of a disappointment, perhaps I just didn't give enough kudos to them being like, okay, well, but they're also a better pass rushing team than I thought that they were going to be. So I love the way that you pointed it out, though. A lot of those guys winning individually, winning their one-on-ones. That shows a ton of individual talent. And it's a good shout out to not only having them here in the top 10, but getting them here at number 4 for you. So that's a good call out. I'm glad that they're getting some love here, even with me potentially being wrong and Bears fans coming after me for not having them in the top 10. I'm glad that our lists are a little bit different as well. For number 4, do you have the Detroit Lions in your top 10 without Aiden?
I do not.
Okay.
And I feel awful about it.
Yeah.
And I should have done. It's the one that I will struggle to sleep with tonight. It was purely like I wanted to have a slight credit for the season projection going forward. But if I have the Browns in there, it is unfair because the interior of the Lions line has actually played really, really well. It's not just been Aiden on his own. It's Aiden as an edge on his own, but the interior guys have played very well. The concern will be them pressuring the quarterback, I guess, consistently with Hutchinson out. But the interior has certainly played very well, particularly against the run.
Yes.
So I that's what I feel bad about. But I just got the initial, thing hit me of like, it's just such a shame that Aiden Hutchinson's out. So I took them off the list.
Yeah, no, and so this is the toughest one. This is the one that I wrestle with. I kind of have the Lions at 4. Out of respect. So yeah. It's kind of like you said, it's tough to take them off because with Aiden Hutchinson in there, this is a top 3 defensive line in the NFL. I mean, you could make a case for them at really any of those spots. I wouldn't put them necessarily number 1, but that you could make them a case for any of the spots in the top 3. With Aiden Hutchinson not there, the reason why I still kept them at number 4, I was thinking I was going to be a little bit lower on them, but when I looked into it, DJ Reader's grading pretty well, including as a pass rusher. Levi Onwuzurike is grading decently well as a rotational sort of pass rusher as well. Aleem McNeil, I think, is playing well. You mentioned the interior. The interior guys are playing well, and then you just had the superstar next to them in Aiden Hutchinson, who was on his way to winning Defensive Player of the Year before he got hurt. I mean, Hutchinson, number 1 in the NFL in pass rush grade, 94.9. He had 7.5 sacks. 45 pressures in 6 weeks, which is just insane, and a 38.3 pass rush win percentage. So bonkers stuff. Like I said, defensive player of the year type of numbers. What is that defense now without Hutchinson? And I think that's a really tough question to answer. It's one that no team would want to answer with their superstar edge rusher out, but that is a little bit of why I couldn't keep the Lions in my top 3. It was hard to totally pull them out of my top 5, because if it was a situation where we were talking a little bit similarly, even like with the 49ers or the Cleveland Browns, where if it was just Hutchinson and kind of nothing else, I really wouldn't have a problem with. I probably wouldn't have kept him out of my top 10. Probably would have had him like 8 or 9 or something like that. But I do think the defensive line overall is better. And what I'm really curious to see is what happens now with the Detroit Lions, because you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were highlighting Hutchinson and how well he was playing, and how the Lions align Hutchinson in a way and align their defensive line in a way where Hutchinson's a little bit wider on the line of scrimmage. It opens up that inside spin move, but it also allows him to attack through the chest of an offensive lineman, through the outside shoulder, and they do that because of how they align the rest of the defensive line. They set up their guys in a certain 3 technique or a certain shade wherever they are in front of the guard in the center, to where they have to slide protection to the left. They cannot slide protection to the right to help with Aiden Hutchinson, because if they do, they're giving away too many one-on-ones in the interior, and those guys are going to win. Do the Detroit Lions have that same strategy and just try to plug somebody else in there at one of those edge spots? I feel like they're not going to. So what does this team look like now on the defensive front without an emphasized superstar at one of those edge rush spots? I think that that's an interesting question to answer. But when I looked at the other numbers for the rest of the team, maybe it's a little bit of just Hutchinson's presence that's elevating those grades as well, with those guys getting one-on-ones. But I wanted to keep them at number 4 because of how well they've been playing overall.
Yeah, that I think is the correct call, and I'm wrong on that one. But I was doing, I think, more projection of where we are right today, because I just think that they're going to have to change their entire structure of their defense. And that's just not something you're going to want to do midseason. You mentioned how they align him. You just could not do that with someone else. It will not have the same impact. Not only does Hutchinson allow them to mess with the blocking mechanics, they're also just washing eligibles out all the time. People are keeping 2 guys in to help on him. Sometimes they use 3 guys in kind of like a slower developing protection plan to try and take him away. No one else on the roster is going to have that kind of impact, right? And if they can't get home with 4, if they can't find different ways to manipulate the protection, now they're going to have to blitz a bunch more. And we've seen those linebackers in coverage struggle already, whilst already having the elevated Aiden Hutchinson factor. And so I'm probably being overly critical in terms of the projection. My fear is just all the issues they've had elsewhere with already having the help of Hutchinson elevating everything will come to the surface more. The other thing with the Lions that I think goes unspoken because of how good Hutchinson is how much he just tilts the offensive game plan a certain way. That he is the most like old school pass rusher in the league, where teams run certain things, run certain actions based on his alignment. Even Myles Garrett doesn't get that kind of treatment. Micah Parsons doesn't get that kind of treatment. The way people go after the Lions in the run game, the way they use the play action world is radically different because of where Hutchinson is aligned on the field, and no one else really gets treated that way. They get treated in similar ways in terms of the protection plan, but not so much in changing the entire style and how you call the offense. So once that goes away and everything's on the table, it's just going to be harder. The Lions get such a bonus and kind of a cheat factor for their linebackers because they know what's coming based on where Hutchinson is and where will and won't be the pressure points on the defense. So it is, to me, it's for any group in the league right now, it's the biggest Jenga block there is, just because of how much he helps everyone else in every facet of the game. And so I'm probably being slightly overly critical because of that before we've actually seen the impact. But we're right to highlight that the interior guys have played really, really well.
Yep. All right, so we've got our top 3s. We're going to get into our top 3s in a second, but first, got to remind you guys that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you didn't feel like you could be your full self, right? It felt like you were wearing a mask. October, it's the season for wearing masks and costumes, all that good stuff. But some of us feel like we're wearing masks and hide a lot more than we want to at work, social life, around our family, whatever it is. You feel like you can't be yourself. Therapy, it helps you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off the mask. Halloween, it's fun, dressing up, costumes, emotion, but it's not for who we are. It's not supposed to be a full-time thing. Look, I've been doing therapy for over a year and a half, and I absolutely love it. It has been exactly that for me. It's allowed me to be more confident in exactly who I am. Maybe change some things about myself that I don't like, but also sort of just understand like how I am, how I think, and how I react to things. It allows me to be more confident in who I am and just always be able to put my best foot forward. Therapy, it can be a really great, useful tool to better understanding how your mind actually works and how you become more aware of your own patterns, behaviors, all that good stuff. it's useful for everybody. It's not just for people who are struggling with something specific. Like I said, it could be really great for positive reinforcement as well. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way for you to get therapy that is right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. You can take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/PFF to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF. All right, so now at this point, the score is even. I have, I think, 2 or 3 teams that you didn't have in your top 10, and now we're even going into the top 3. If we don't have one of our top 3s in the top 10 at all, I think that will be a very interesting conversation. But who do you have at number 3? Let's kick it off here in the top 3.
I have the Kansas City Chiefs.
As do I. Okay, I have them at number 3 as well. Yes.
And it goes beyond Chris Jones, but I don't think you can start the conversation without discussing Chris Jones, particularly the last 2 weeks. And the game against the Saints, it almost made me sad for like everyone involved, how much better he was than everyone on the field. And it was just painful to watch the Saints try to get near him. He has just gone back to that every play game wrecker that he's been when he's been at his best. Then Tershawn Wharton being one of the under-discussed stories of the season as a true running mate inside, and their ability to just compress everything inside means if you don't have a true off-script creative quarterback, you have no hope against these guys because you've got all the movement in the secondary, right? All the linebacker stuff they do, and Carl Laftis is playing really well on the edge as well. So unless you have someone like Lamar Jackson who can move and create, it's just not going to happen against this group anymore. So I think they've reached a level now where for all the fun with Spags, all the creativity, they can just play dominant upfront football when they need to.
I agree. When I looked at the Kansas City Chiefs, one, it's really hard to keep the Chiefs off of this list just because of Chris Jones. And when I say off of this list, I mean like even like in the top 3 just because of Chris Jones. I don't want to sit here and like say that somebody's Aaron Donald because Aaron Donald was obviously crazy, but like the high ends of how Chris Jones can take over a game, it's Aaron Donald like. And when Aaron Donald was in the league, there's no way that you were going to have the Rams at the very least outside of a top 5 of any defensive lines at any point in time with Los Angeles when he was there. It feels like that's the case with Kansas City, and they are much more than Chris Jones, but Chris Jones gives you a top 5 defensive line floor. That's the type of caliber player that we are talking about here. He's one of the greatest defensive players that we have seen over the last certainly 10, 20 years. One of the greatest defensive players all time, maybe when it's all said and done. And what he is doing at a peak level, you mentioned the Saints and just beating up on a really depleted Saints defensive line. That should have been the matchup. That was absolutely a telltale sign of how that game went, and it was because of what Chris Jones is able to do in the middle and how good he is. You mentioned Wharton, who's been fantastic for them as well. PFF grades, I believe. Where's his PFF grades? Above 81 so far over the last 3 weeks in particular. George Karlaftis, the same thing, above an 80 PFF grade overall over the last 3 weeks. And then just overall, like how Steve Spagnuolo uses these guys. I mean, it's just a creative, aggressive coach that loves to get pressure up front, and he's got the guys to be able to do it. So I know we're talking about defensive lines here, defensive line rankings, but you throw in what they do with the linebackers and how they blitz the corners as well. It's just a creative defensive game plan that's really, really tough to block and stay in front of and give your quarterback ample time. But getting back to the guys in the trenches, it starts with Chris Jones, but it's more than Chris Jones. It's beyond that conversation that we talked about. Okay, what are the Lions like without Hutchinson? What are the Cleveland Browns without Garrett or beyond just Nick Bosa or whatever? The Chiefs, you do have one of those superstars, but you also have guys who are really stepping up and playing some really good football. So I also have the Chiefs, particularly for how they have played over the last 3 weeks, at number 3 here. Who do you have as number 2?
Number 2, I have the Baltimore Ravens.
As do I have the Baltimore Ravens at number 2. We're going to be in lockstep here in the top 3.
It looks that way. And the thing that jumps out to me with them is just how many different ways they can win. You mentioned there's Spags and what he does in terms of helping them out. And the Ravens do creative things to help people out up front. But a lot of what Spags do, the creativity side is in the coverage game, right? When you just boil down what do they do up front, it's who is our best player, who's their worst. And he just kind of descends down in order week by week. You get that matchup, you get that matchup, based on who we think is the best player on their weakest player. They'll move Chris Jones around like that. With the Ravens, they are able to shapeshift what they do with the front week by week, in part because of how talented the guys are up front, but just the different body types and skill sets. We've mentioned Adefa Always breakout a few weeks ago and how well he's played as just a get off the ball pass rusher. Travis Jones inside playing really well. Kyle Van Noy remains one of the most mysterious, unbelievable players in the NFL. And the thing, when you actually watch the tape of Van Noy, you can see all the figures and kind of default to your reasoning of, well, there's scheme help. They've got such good players. Madubuike is unbelievable. He's getting unblocked pressures. When you go and watch the film, these are high quality sacks he's producing. He's probably produced, and I've not broken down every single sack, but I would be, fair in saying, based on the top sack artists in the league, he has as many high quality sacks as anyone else in the NFL. Certainly not something I would have thought coming into the season for as good as Van Noy has been in that system. So it's just across the board. They've got rotational pieces. Madubuike did not start the season well, and he's their best defensive player and now has started to play at the level he did last season over the past couple of weeks. So it's just all the way around. So much talent, so much depth, and ability to put them in so many different fronts and formations and shapes that it's hard to keep them out of the top three.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the guys that are there sort of in that top four. Odafe Kyle Van Noy, you throw Travis Jones in there as well. Madubuike, of course, but then you look a little bit further. I mean, David Ojabo hasn't even really broken out yet, become the player that they expect him to be. So he is in that rotation. They have Yannick Ngakoue on the team as well, who over the past 2 weeks, pretty decent pass rush win grade, pretty high pass rush win percentage. He's not playing a ton, but getting in that rotation. It's just a really deep team. They can throw a lot of stuff at you, and the floor seems very high with them overall as a group, and then the pass rush ceiling as a collective is fantastic as well. They don't necessarily have a Chris Jones, a Nick Bosa, a Myles Garrett, but that's okay. Defensive line play, it's all about creating that chaos and really attacking the offensive line at all angles, and there's just not many teams that do that at a better level right now than the Baltimore Ravens, especially over the last 3 weeks. As a team over the last 3 weeks, 77.6 run defense grade, 76.5 pass rush grade, 80.9 overall defensive line grade as a team. So these are really high scores overall, and just show not only the ceiling of what they achieved together, but also the floor is so high for this team every single week. You got those top four guys, all of them pass rush win percentages in double digits. You could throw Yannick Ngakoue in there as well, again, who I said has played with them over the last 2 weeks. So all of this is really good stuff from the Baltimore Ravens, why I had to have them at number 2. But there's also a reason why I couldn't have them at number 1. And that's because the team at number 1, and if you don't say the Pittsburgh Steelers, we're going to fight, because that means that they're not in your top 10, and they're clearly number 1 in the NFL for me. But assuming that the Pittsburgh Steelers are number 1 for you, they've got everything, man. They've got Cam Hayward in the middle. They've got Keanu Benton. They have that Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett superstar, and TJ Watt, who's having an unbelievable year, not just as a pass rusher, but as a run defense player. He had a 99.0 run defense grade last week. That is stupid. That's incredible. It's TJ Watt type of stuff, and not many other defenders can be able to do it. He, I think, steps into being that defensive player of the year candidate, certainly with Hutchinson and his crazy numbers from the first 6 weeks of the season. With him not being able to play the rest of the way, TJ Watt, to me, gets into that spot for how well he is playing. But you have the superstar at the top. You have the 2 guys on the interior. And then the crazy part is you're throwing in Nick Herbig, and then you're getting Alex Highsmith back as well this week into the mix as these rotational type of pass rushers who are playing opposite TJ Watt, who are playing at a really high level in their sort of specialized roles. This is what we want you to do, and they do it very, very well. So they win individually. They win at a high level. It's a high floor run defense team. They have superstars on the interior, superstars at the edge rush spots. This, to me, is the best defensive line in the NFL, led by a player who could win Defensive Player of the Year when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and really on your Defensive Player of the Year ballot, they should have 2 guys. Cam Hayward, you mentioned, has been every bit as good as TJ Watt, which is just incomprehensible given the age and what's demanded of him in the system compared to TJ's. He runs his same thing right over and over again. We know what TJ Watt is on the outside, and you just hope that he hits that thing, 5-6 times. And this season he's been hitting it 8, 9, 10 times a game. So Hayward has been unbelievable. You mentioned Herbig. I think that is the real story kind of simmering away there. Herbig has a chance, I think, to be something really special. And they don't use him anywhere near as much as they probably should do, because they got Alex Highsmith. They are just falling over talented sub rushers. And Highsmith, they want to play on every down. Herbig, they roll in as a rotational rusher. When he plays against the Cowboys, because Highsmith is out and he's got to play every down, he shows he can deliver in run defense. He shows he can still get off the ball, win with speed, bend, and power. So they have a real chance here to have I think at least, and maybe Herbig more as a sub rusher, but 3 off the ball, Hayward and Herbig, elite production type pass rushers, and then you have Highsmith there as well. So it's so deep. You mentioned both star power, 2 super duper stars, 2 splashy, effective, consistent edge defenders. The interiors played fine alongside Cam Hayward and Ogunjobi and Keanu Bentu. So no one to me comes close to matching that level of consistency, star power, and then all the ancillary pieces.
I mean, it's a great shout out with Cam Hayward. It's not just, TJ Watt, and then they also have Cam Hayward. It is, you are right. Cam Hayward should be in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation as well. When you look at just this whole team and TJ Watt versus Cam Hayward, if you want to say that, like for the award, pass rushing, Cam Hayward's been even better this year. 87.2 pass rush grade compared to TJ Watt's 72.8. When you look at overall total pressures, Cam Hayward's got 22, TJ Watt's got 15. Pass rush win percentage, TJ Watt 14.9, and Cam Hayward 19.4. He's got a better pressure percentage as well. So Hayward playing unbelievable. I think that you're right. I kind of just said that, hey, TJ Watt's got to be the front runner, but if TJ Watt's the front runner, Cam Hayward's like right there as well. You were totally right. They have 2 legit Defensive Player of the Year candidates playing on their defensive line, and anytime that's the case, obviously I think that you got to be in the top 3, and we in fact have the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 1. So I just want to recap for anybody that is listening on audio only and doesn't have the visuals right in front of you. Ollie, I can't remember yours exactly, so I'll go 10-1, and then you can list off your 10-1. Number 10, I had the Denver Broncos. Number 9, I had the Houston Texans. Number 8, I had the New York Giants. 7, the Philadelphia Eagles. 6, the Los Angeles Rams. 5, the San Francisco 49ers. 4, the Detroit Lions. 3, the Kansas City Chiefs. 2, the Baltimore Ravens. And then number 1, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ollie, what was your 10?
10, I had the Minnesota Vikings. 9, the Houston Texans. 8, the Denver Broncos. 7, the Giants. 6, the Philadelphia Eagles. 5, I had the Cleveland Browns. 4, the Chicago Bears. Controversial, may regret that in a week. 3, the Kansas City Chiefs. 2, the Baltimore Ravens. Then we agreed on number 1 being the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Now you gotta stand on it. You gotta stand on it. Bears fans who are watching the show, they're like, hell yeah, baby, we're in the top 5. Stand strong on it, Ollie. Ollie does fantastic work over at the Read Optional Substack, also on the Read Optional podcast with John Ledyard, does the Audibles and the Analytics show as well. So make sure you go subscribe and check out all of Ollie's great work. If you don't have a PFF Plus subscription and you want to get your hands on all the info that we talked about here on the show, you can do so by going to pff.com, getting yourself that PFF Plus sub. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly. Thank you guys so much for watching another episode of In the Trenches. We will be back to rank offensive lines in the NFL coming at you next week. See you guys then.